Hi, everybody. My name's Doug, and I'm an alcoholic. And it's good to be here, and it's good to see a lot of people here. It's nice to know you're interested in Alcoholics Anonymous. Would you please join me in the serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. Our singleness of purpose. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a person in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. The introduction. The 38th General Service Conference was titled Our Singleness of Purpose, Key to Unity. The unity being that of Tradition 1, where our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Not only the welfare of those with us today, but the welfare of those yet to come is at stake here. During the past 10 years, unity and its key, singleness of purpose, have been seriously deteriorating because of this trend. The personal recovery of many has been placed in peril. To an alarming degree, the welfare of the entire fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous has been placed in danger. It is the purpose of this workshop to identify in specific terms the nature of the problem, its state today, and to encourage corrective actions to deter and hopefully reverse the growth of the most serious challenge that the fellowship has ever faced. Here's also something I'm going to read out of AA Comes of Age. There are those who predict that AA may well become a new spearhead for spiritual awakening throughout the world. When our friends say these things, they are both generous and sincere. But we of AA must reflect that such a tribute and such a prophecy could well prove to be a heady drink for most of us. That is, if we really came to believe that this is the real purpose of AA, and if we commence to behave accordingly, our society, therefore, will prudently cleave to its single purpose, the carrying of the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Let us resist the proud assumption that since God has enabled us to do well in one area, we are destined to be a channel of saving grace for everybody. That is out of AA Comes of Age, page 232. And to start this off, we're going to have our first presenter on the problem, and that is Angel.
I'm a recovered alcoholic, and my name is Angel. And it's a pleasure to be here. When I speak from a podium of Alcoholics Anonymous, I share my experience, my strength, and my hope. And my experience is how I drank, my strength is God, and my hope is that every member here, newcomer or not, seizes upon this chip of a book launched on the world tide of alcoholism, reads it, and does it. When I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, and my sobriety date is March 28, 1979, I walked into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hadn't had a drink in several days, and 20 sober women downstairs in a bank building told me everything I needed to know about staying sober one day at a time for the rest of my life. Don't drink. Don't drink. They told me to get a copy of the Big Book, to get a copy of the 12 and 12, to get a sponsor, to take the steps to not get emotionally involved for the first 14 years or so. They told me to put the plug in the jug, to take the cotton out of my ears and put it in my mouth, to suit up and show up. It was a whole bunch of stuff that those 20 sober women downstairs in a bank building in Palm Springs told me to do. There were no sensitive newcomers. They were not in the least concerned about my feelings. It was of no interest to them whatever. They were not interested in any of the information that I had garnered over the years reading Psychobabble, because Psychobabble did not get me sober. Alcoholics Anonymous and the grace of a loving God got me sober and keep me sober. And over the years, I have watched the eroding and the dilution of the AA message, and I have made my own nickel-dime compromises with Alcoholics Anonymous. I have done it myself, so I speak only from my own experience. I was sitting last night taking copious notes because I am armed with information. I am absolutely armed to the teeth with information, and my notes that I have taken, and all I ever do from a podium is to speak from the heart, because I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is the only thing in my entire life that I have ever been faithful to. I had 2 marriages that lasted 4 years. So that's the level of my fidelity to something, but my faithfulness and my fidelity to the principles and traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous are my very life. And in the 12 and 12, Bill Wilson writes that there is not too great a personal sacrifice for the good of the fellowship. There is not too much that I can do for the good of the fellowship, because I have a custodial relationship with Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a custodial relationship with the traditions and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have taken my stand in AA. I've been willing to stand up with what today is the unpopular view. And it takes a little bit of courage to stand on the firing line. And I have old-timers come up to me and whisper, "Oh, we're so glad you said that. We're afraid to." And it's like, you better buy me a flak jacket then. Better buy me a bulletproof vest. Because I go to meetings today where I have walked into hostile territory. I go into meetings today where there's enough announcements for 419 other 12-step programs that the whole atmosphere in the room has no unity. Just the atmosphere in the room is tweaked from the beginning, and I walk in there and I know. 3 or 4 years ago, I spoke at the Valley Club. And I walked in and I knew I was in the wrong place at the alleged AA meeting. And I sat down, I saw a couple of girls, and I sat down next to them, and I said, "Hi, my name's Angel, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, my name's Susie Cream Cheese, I'm a heroin addict." And I tell you what, I never met a heroin addict on the street drinking. I have met heroin addicts in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where I've met them all. And I said, "Isn't this an AA meeting?" She said, "Well, it's all the same thing." Yeah. No, I didn't do Johnny Walker Red intravenously. No. If you wish to tell me that alcohol is a drug, I am willing to concede that it is in with the ethers and the sedatives, but I don't need no prescription. I don't have to march down to the Save-On and hand a prescription across the counter to the pharmacist to get my 6-pack of Padre beer. I don't need a prescription for Crabari and other fine unnatural California jug wines. Booze is booze. Anyway, my adventure at the Valley Club was the room filled up with young people. I used to be young once. I had some fun out there. I drank. I carried on. I ran my life to the ragged edge, running, jumping, and playing. And I finally got to the podium, and I realized that I was talking to people who weren't going to know what I was talking about. And I finally said 10 minutes into my AA talk, "How many drug addicts are in the room tonight?" Every single person raised their hand as a drug addict. And I said, "I believe that you will not identify with me, and that I will be wasting my time and yours to talk to you about alcoholism." And I left. And they had a round of wild applause, and I drove home furious. I drove home furious because I will tell you what, there used to be guardrails in Alcoholics Anonymous. There used to be guardrails in Alcoholics Anonymous to keep meetings from careening off the edge, to keep newcomers from careening off the edge. And those guardrails in Alcoholics Anonymous are a wall of old-timers sitting with their arms crossed. Those are the guardrails in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I experience today the notion that newcomers come in and know more than I do. I get looked at like I've grown 2 heads. Maybe I have. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it because, you know what I was thinking? It was always a joke with me that out of the mouth of babies comes oatmeal. Maybe out of the mouths of babies in Alcoholics Anonymous comes oatmeal. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of being informed about the latest revelation from Kaiser and the latest revelation from CompCare and the latest revelation from every other two-bit facility making money off drunks that there is. I'm tired of it. Because one drunk sharing with another is our singleness of purpose. It is my singleness of purpose to share with another alcoholic how I drank, what happened, and what I'm like today. That's how it works. It's how it works. I watched a program the other night about Charles Lindbergh and his transatlantic flight. And Charles Lindbergh was on fire with a great idea. And he set off in this little airplane made out of spit and good wishes with 450 gallons of gasoline, 5 sandwiches, candy bars, and some dead reckoning to where Paris was. And he got there on fire with a great idea when Bill Wilson went to Akron, Ohio, stood in a hotel lobby and contemplating the tinkling of the glasses and the voices in the bar. He was on fire with a great idea that he needed to talk to another drunk, and he found Dr. Bob Smith. And he carried the message to Bob. And Bob had his last drink June 10th, 1935. They were on fire with a great idea, one drunk sharing with another. The other thing that I no longer hear in meetings, and it just makes a number of things just make me nuts, but I'm relatively wired together today. At my first meeting, those 20 sober women, and there wasn't an MFCC, a PhD, or some old dame with more degrees than a rectal thermometer sitting there. They told me that I had a fatal malady, an allergy of the body, and an obsession of the mind. That I have a fatal malady, I am allergic to beverage alcohol. When I have the first drink, it sets off an allergic reaction in my system that I drink till I'm done, not till I've had enough. I've never had enough booze. I sat the other day and I had a glass of orange juice, and I got ready to pour another glass of orange juice. I said, wait, I've had enough. I never had enough booze, ever, because I passed out first. I always passed out before I'd had the perfect right amount. Anyway, those women drilled into me, and the people who have been my teachers in Alcoholics Anonymous drilled into me day after day after day, allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. If I do not drink, the allergy does not manifest itself, but I will remain allergic to beverage alcohol for the rest of my life. Alcohol is water soluble. For these meetings that qualify birthdays with anything that causes you problems from the neck up, I have news for you. Alcohol is water soluble. It is freely bathed every cell in your body and my body. There is booze in my hair. There is booze in my toenails. Alcohol is water soluble. It affects the entire body. The damage I have done to alcohol, to my body by alcohol, continues with or without a drink. The damage that I have done with alcohol, and that's why when I was new, they said, if you drink again, you will be in worse shape than the day you were on your last drink, because the damage continues. I have seen people die with less than 2 ounces of alcohol in their system, a fatal malady, a hypersensitivity to beverage alcohol that approximately 10% of the population has. The other 90% are social drinkers, and I never wanted to be a social drinker. What's that? See, I can't even explain what social drinkers are, except they let booze evaporate in the glass. They're not drinking fast enough. How can they let it sit there? The ice cubes are ruining it. My friend Ted H. from Long Beach just handed me the funniest. He walked up here just to distract me like he always does. You were an hour late getting here, Ted. Did you find an untreated Al-Anon? Anyway.
We don't want to know.
We do know.
See, that's the fun of Alcoholics Anonymous. We all know one another too well. We all know one another too well, one drunk sharing with another, because if we don't get to know one another instantly, we have no idea how long we'll be here. We have no idea. I came to a room full of strangers, told you everything I knew about myself, and you said, it's okay, keep coming back. Keep coming back. I found in Alcoholics Anonymous the family that I never had. And I will also say that I grew up in a family that did not hug. If you ran into one another in the hallway, you jumped back 10 paces and said, excuse me. And when I was 3 years sober, the huggers descended on Palm Springs. And I tell you what, the big book of Narcotics Anonymous talks about hugs, not drugs, and it doesn't talk about hugs, not drugs in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I will tell you this, that I don't like to be hugged by every Tom, Dick, and Harry, Susie, Jane, and Helen that walks down the pike. I shake hands with people. I simply shake hands with people because Alcoholics Anonymous is not about my social life. It is not about finding a better job. It's not about finding true love. It's not about finding a better car or anything else. It's about freedom from alcohol through the practice and teaching of the 12 steps. It's what Bill Wilson defines sobriety as. Freedom from alcohol through the practice and teaching of the 12 steps. That's my sole purpose. That is the sole purpose of an AA group. That's it. And certainly we help one another. Certainly we show up and help one another. But it's not to stay sober on the fellowship alone. If I only came to meetings and thought that meetings would keep me sober, I would be drunk. Really, God keeps me sober. A power greater than myself keeps me sober, and I have been willing to do the footwork. Dr. Silkworth and the doctor's opinion, and the doctor's opinion, truthfully, is buried way at the front of the big book. I mean, if you want to hide something from a drunk, put it in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Silkworth in the doctor's opinion says 3 times that we have an allergy of the body and obsession of the mind. And also in Language of the Heart by Bill Wilson, he reiterates it 3 times without those passwords. Without those passwords that Dr. Silkworth gave us of allergy and obsession, AA would never have worked. I am not addicted to alcohol. I am not codependent on alcohol. My little child with its teddy bear is not drunk at the moment. My adult is trying to express itself. And I have a hypersensitivity to alcohol. You can use your way into an addiction for anything. You cannot drink your way into alcoholism. You are either allergic to it or you are not. And it says on page 92 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that if I am convinced that you are a real alcoholic, then it is up to me to stress freely the nature of our fatal malady, the allergy and the obsession. It's up to me to stress it and introduce you to AA, take you through the steps so you can carry the message. That's all it's about. Any problem that is going on in Alcoholics Anonymous today begins and ends with each one of us. Any problem that is going on today begins and ends with each one of us. Because if we are not sitting in meetings as sober members with time, if we're not sitting there to inform the newcomer, the wreckage will continue. And in my view, the forest fire has burned out of control for a long time. And it's like it's a reclamation project to reclaim Alcoholics Anonymous for alcoholics to share with other alcoholics how they have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. There is a book out called Getting Better, An Inside View of AA by a prominent Pulitzer Prize-winning author. I have read the book. I wrote her a snotty letter. I ironed her tie for her because she railed against hard-nosed, square-assed, fundamentalist old-timers in New York, where she got sober. And I wrote back to her, Dear Nan, if it weren't for hard-nosed, square-assed, fundamentalist old-timers, there would not have been a meeting for you to come tap dancing into in 1976. Old-timers are the backbone of Alcoholics Anonymous. Old-timers are the guardrails, the quiet wisdom, the silent example. And if we let the inmates run the institution, We are all in deep doo-doo. We are all in deep doo-doo, and I see meetings all over the place where let's make Joe with 2.5 hours of sobriety treasurer of the meeting. And, you know, Harriet over here can get the speakers for the meeting, and if the person getting speakers for your meeting has never heard a good AA talk, how will they know when they're hearing a not-so-good AA talk? If they don't know what the message is, how can they make a judgment call on what a good AA talk is? And when I was about 3 years sober, there was a man in Palm Springs who really just flipped out in a noon meeting one day, but he said something brilliant. And what I found is every now and then you will meet someone in Alcoholics Anonymous who has one brilliant thing to say, and you'd better be there that day to hear it, otherwise you may miss it. Because that may be the only brilliant thing they have to say for the rest of their lives. But Jack sat there kind of bobbing and weaving in his chair with his NASA jumpsuit on, and he was 12 years sober at the time. It's just nuts. But Jack said one of the most brilliant things I have ever heard said in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, you will meet two types of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, those who know and those who don't know. And it is up to me to know, by taking the steps, by having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, that I will know those who know. I will also figure out quickly those who don't know. And that can be shocking, because there are people sitting around with long-term years after their name who have never taken the steps, who cannot, if you ask them a pointed question about something in the big book, will not be able to tell you about it. Just go home and read it, you'll find it, because they don't know where it is either. I spoke with a girl the other day, and she wanted to know when I'd be sharing again, and I said, well, at a Singleness of Purpose workshop on Saturday at Angelino, and she said, oh, what's singleness of purpose? And I said, don't pull my chain. I said, you have been sitting around Alcoholics Anonymous for 4 years. Don't pull my chain. Don't fool with me about this. This is deadly serious. I said, what do you think singleness of purpose is? And she said, me. And I said, no. Our singleness of purpose is one drunk sharing with another. It's in the second edition of the big book. There are 4 paradoxes. It's the professor and the paradoxes, the story, and oddly enough, they should have left that story in and left out page 449, in my opinion. The professor and the paradox lists the 4 paradoxes of Alcoholics Anonymous that we quote all the time, but that story isn't in the book anymore. Makes sense to me. And the paradoxes are that we surrender to win, we die in order to live, we give it away to keep it. What's the 4th one? Now it escapes me. Anyway, go read the second edition and find the 4 paradoxes. See, I just get wound up. I get wound up because I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And Alcoholics Anonymous was there for me when I came in. When I walked into meetings in Palm Springs, the guardrails were sitting there. The guardrails were sitting there around the walls with their arms crossed. And I was told when I was new that the people I disliked the most when I was new, if I stayed, would be the people I loved and valued the most. And that is true. That is true. Luckily, I didn't launch an ashtray at anyone's head, because I got so sick and tired of hearing old-timers tell the same old story, and the only way an old-timer ever changes their story is to drink again. Old-timers don't change their stories unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Anyway, I think the greatest thing that I can do, the greatest thing any one of us can do, is to go back to the traditions. Bill Wilson didn't write the 12 opinions. Traditions are traditions. That's why they're called traditions. It's like Moses didn't come down off the hill with the 10 suggestions. Bill Wilson didn't write the 12 opinions. And the 12 traditions apply to me personally as well as to AA as a whole. And it says that our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. It doesn't say our membership ought to include all who suffer. It says ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. And we are not a big blue and white beach umbrella for every deviant form of social and moral behavior out there. We're a little band of drunks We're a band of problem drinkers, men and women who lost the ability to control their drinking. We are an anonymous spiritual fellowship of men and women who have lost the ability to control their drinking. Each one of us here has a duty, an obligation, that the hand of AA is there, that if I do not have the message that a person needs, that I carry them to the message, that I do not give a newcomer disinformation, that I do not try to be all things to all people. I have no information for a narcotics addict except the phone number of Narcotics Anonymous and the willingness to take them to a meeting. That is the only information I have. Outside issues in A are everything other than alcohol. Outside issues. I'm sick of outside issues. There's enough issues out there to start a whole new toilet paper factory out of issues and answers. We deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, powerful. It is up to each one of us to reach out our hand, being convinced that the newcomer is a real alcoholic, to say, come on in, don't leave. Thank you.
Angel, I'm about to develop an attitude. Thanks, Ted. Okay, our next speaker is Don.
Man, that's a hard act to follow. My name's Don. I'm an alcoholic. And in case anybody's interested, my sobriety date is September 8, 1964. Before I start, I want to hold up this thing. Problems other than alcohol. I wish to hell people in this program would read this pamphlet. There is so much misunderstanding in Alcoholics Anonymous, both at the personal level and in the group level, that could be answered by simply reading what it says here the way Bill Wilson wrote it. Without alteration, without elaboration, without complication, there are a lot of answers right here. And if people really understood this, there would be much less to be discussed here today. Particularly during the last 10 years, there's been an upsurge of practices and philosophy and meetings that dilute and distort the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is significant that this coincides with the explosion in commercial treatment facilities. Now, you can call them treatment facilities, recovery units, whatever you want to call them, but you get the general idea. And that most of the present problems are the direct result of teachings developed by these facilities to enhance their programs and their pocketbooks. There's no question that some treatment centers have been way stations which have introduced many sufferers to information on dependency and extended the hope of recovery to their patients. At the same time, their record of successful graduates is questionable, and it must be remembered that they deal in chemical dependency, and there is a very key phrase, chemical dependency. It includes everything in the nature of a chemical that anybody ever thought of taking or that will ever come down the pike. And that no clear distinction from Alcoholics Anonymous principles is made, even though they demand that their graduates all go to Alcoholics Anonymous. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we deal with alcohol, period. By far the most serious problem is the faction that insists that Alcoholics Anonymous become all things to all people and be known as anything or addicts or Addictions Anonymous. In other words, they demand that we renounce our singleness of purpose, that in spite of the sad examples of earlier fellowships and treatment groups, namely Oxford groups and the Washingtonians, there is also a group of serious nuisance items that tend to dilute the message and frequently confuse newcomers. They detract from rather than contributing to singleness of purpose and carrying the message. While not all of these problems originated with the treatment programs, they have in many cases been promoted by them. Always remember that our name says who we are, Alcoholics Anonymous. Our third tradition, of course, says that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. It does not say the requirement for membership is a desire to stop using, to stop sniffing, to stop anything else. It does not say that we have to stop gambling, we have to stop beating our wives or husbands or whatever you want to insert in there. It says very simply the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking alcohol. Our fifth tradition says that we carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. This is the purpose and the sole purpose of the group. We do not carry the message to the narcotic addict or the gambler or the overeater or anybody else. Purely and simply to the alcoholic who still suffers. And just a little aside there, I might point out, that you can be dry and even sober for years and still be an alcoholic who still suffers, who still needs the message badly. I've been in that situation a good many times myself. One of the things that's happened, of course, is as the result of these teachings by these treatment centers, they turn out a group of graduates who are terribly confused as to... I have no intention of getting into the argument of drug, not drug. That's entirely beside the point. What I'm interested in is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to know how to live without the use of alcohol in my life. And the program has given me this. The big book has given me this. And I'm going to stick to what it says in the big book. We had a discussion here a while back over, let's use the language of Alcoholics Anonymous. And somebody said, well, if it ain't in the first 164 pages, it ain't AA. And I differed with that a little bit because I think everything that Bill Wilson wrote is AA. So if I can find it in anything that Bill Wilson wrote, I'll go along with it. But we really don't have a definition of the language of Alcoholics Anonymous, unfortunately. Or maybe it's fortunate, I don't know. I think the most serious problem in the program today are the graduates who have between 5 and 10 years, graduates of treatment centers. They came into AA in large numbers and effectively crowded out the then current AA members. They drowned out the old-timers with their new AA and established control of many groups. In the eyes of newcomers, they are now the old-timers and are considered the AAs to emulate. This is a powerful obstacle to overcome if unity and singleness of purpose are ever to be reestablished. It is entirely possible that there will be a split with Alcoholics Anonymous, in which the Addict Anonymous type people go in one direction and AA goes in another, and it's going to be very painful. But you can see it happening today. Old-timers are dropping out of larger groups, are forming their own groups, or attending small groups where they at least have something approaching a majority of the membership in that group and going in the direction that is used by many people called back to basics. Let's get rid of all the bullshit in the program and go back to basic AA in the big book. There's a lot of that going on, and if it continues to go the way it has been, it's going to, in my opinion, end up in a split. And maybe it's just as well. Let the people who want to be anything in Addict Anonymous be it whatever they want. They can teach whatever they want. They can believe what they please. But don't change the name of my program to Addicts Anonymous, because I'm not an addict, and I have no intention of belonging to it. Today it is common to hear people identify as an alcoholic and an addict. In some meetings it is difficult to know whether one is in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting or a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Increasingly, some speakers will spend the majority of their pitch on their drug problem, completely failing to recognize or insisting on not recognizing that it is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that is exactly that and nothing else. Sharing of their narcotic problem belongs in Narcotics Anonymous. Some of these speakers will excuse their confusion by saying drugs are part of my story. This is probably true, and there is no harm done if a casual reference is made to narcotic or other addictions. But extended discussion of these problems has no place in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Most of us have more than one compulsive problem. But if the narcotic addict has the right to discuss their compulsion at length, then the overeaters, the gamblers, the codependents, and at least 100 other types all have the right to discuss their problems in the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The only thing we have in common is our alcoholism, and the only message we can carry is that of recovery from alcoholism, nothing else. We have no message for the narcotic addict. We have no message for the overeater. We have no message for any of the other 150 types or more. And the only message which one of them, anybody else in our meeting can bring to us personally is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Doug read this section on our society, therefore, will cleave prudently to its singleness of purpose. Let us resist the proud assumption that since God has enabled us to do well in one area, we are destined to become a channel of saving grace for everybody. Resist the proud assumption. And that proud assumption is going around rampant in the fellowship today. Much of the confusion over the role of the people who identify to more than one problem in AA is a result of exposure to the chemical dependency programs where no distinction is made between the message of chemical dependency and the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Patients are frequently put through ego deflation sessions where they are encouraged to admit of their compulsive problems. But while this type of training is not AA recovery program, graduates come to AA thinking that they have participated in Alcoholics Anonymous as part of their training, while what much of they have learned has nothing to do with the Alcoholics Anonymous program. Angel mentioned Nan Robertson's book, and I'm going to mention it again, but for a completely different reason. I agree with what Angel said about some of her problems. The thing in that book that was interesting to me was there's a guy by the name of John T. Schwartzlos, who apparently at one time was director of the Betty Ford Center. And I'd like to read you something that this guy wrote. This is a quotation from Richardson's book. Patients ask me how important it is that they go to AA after they're through here. And this is a quote from Schwartzlos. I'll give you a guarantee. When you leave here, if you don't go to AA, you won't make it. There is no question that Schwartzlos believes in the effectiveness of the Alcoholics Anonymous program, but then, and this is another quote, AA is the epitome of tolerance, flexibility, and inclusiveness. But some of the drug addicts who have been in here have told me that they have been turned away from AA meetings in the Midwest and South when they have said they were just addicted to drugs. Now I tell all addicts to say they are both alcoholics and drug addicts. Thus, Schwartzlos is abusing both the addict and Alcoholics Anonymous in what is supposed to be a program of honesty. If that isn't, that really tears it as far as I'm concerned, to take an innocent addict and tell him to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and lie just so they can get into a closed meeting. Can you imagine what would happen if I, as a person who has never been addicted to drugs, were to go to NA and start pretending to be an addict? I would either be laughed or booed out of the place in very short order because it's obvious I couldn't speak the language and I couldn't communicate with those people. How in the hell does Schwartzlos expect a non-alcoholic to communicate in an AA meeting? From another direction, there is considerable evidence that even the General Service Organization has been invaded by the Addicts Anonymous types. One of the things I'd like to point out in closing, the treatment centers, maybe you think I'm a little hard on them, I think they deserve it. They probably deserve more, because basically they got into this innocently, really. Early on, the treatment centers and AA worked side by side. Gradually, the treatment centers started treating people with pill problems, treating people with marijuana, finding people with cocaine, people with heroin, and a whole host of other things. They had started sending their alcoholics to Alcoholics Anonymous. They continued to send their graduates regardless of what their problem was, because one of their basic problems is they have to have a place to send people. After 30 days, they got to go someplace, because they aren't going to stay clean, sober, or whatever if they don't go to some sort of a 12-step program. And let's face it, for a long time, Alcoholics Anonymous was the only game in town. So it was natural that they sent them. One of the things that you'll notice about the treatment center people, they love the 12 steps. Man, they quote them at every chance they get. But did you ever hear them talk about the big book or the 12 traditions? They avoid those things like the plague. They don't want their people reading those things. Those say nasty things that they don't want their graduates to know about. That book I picked up over at Price Club, there isn't a single word in there about the big book. There isn't a single word in there about the 12 traditions, because the traditions say nasty things like we carry the message to the alcoholic, and the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Look sometime, you'll see it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Don. If you want coffee, it'll help the coffee pourers. If you just raise your hand when you see them. Right, Todd? Okay. Our last speaker is Liz.
I listened to that little old lady, and I thought, okay, well, she probably has something. I mean, she's been sober a number of years. I might as well try listening to her. And I found out that slowly but surely I became part of their little group. That was my home group. You know, that's what I want to talk a lot about, where those old-timers are. What happened was I had like 20 people pushing the chair out for me to go sit down. Now, if I had one person, just this old lady, I probably could have out-shouted her. But when 20 people are in front of you sitting like, you don't know what you're talking about, sit down, you know, the tendency is for you to sit down if you're 1 against 20, you know. But if it's, you know, recently, you don't have those 20 there help guiding you to sit down when you're shooting your mouth off inappropriately. What happens is you can convey the message that something's amiss here or something's a solution, which may not be true. So this little lady kind of guided me, and I said, well, you know, I know about the traditions, because that's another one of our solutions, to get to know something about the traditions, study them. And I said, oh, I know about the traditions because, you know, they read them while we're getting coffee in order for us to sit down. She kind of said, oh, God, no, Liz. You know, like you're supposed to sit down and we read you the traditions so you listen. I used to think of it as a filler, you know. Put that time in till we get our coffee stirred up and get enough cookies so we can work our way down to our seats. And she said, no, they're kind of the basics behind us. She said, there would be no meeting here today, okay, for you to come to and for us to love you. And I don't know how much she loved me, but she did try, until you recover. And she told me she had a daughter my age and that she was not going to be able to help her daughter. She was going to train me so that I'd be able to help her daughter, because her daughter was out there doing some research for us. So she said, I don't have a lot of help for my daughter now. She said, but I got hope for you, and you're going to be the one that helps her. So what she did is we took out the big book, and she said, gee, you know, they're in the back of the big book. You might want to read them and get familiar with them. And I said, okay. And then she said, now we're going to talk about them. And what we do is we go to workshops. Matter of fact, my home group now has some workshops. They put workshops on. One of them was on the traditions. And there were some very spectacular. People took a particular tradition and talked about it. And some of them were real good, and some were a little shaky because they weren't familiar with them, you know. And what I found out is most of these people had had business meetings in their groups or had fights. Let me tell you, we had some fights. And I didn't realize that when you have business meetings, you may have disagreements. And I remember being very shaky with this lady, and I said, you know, I can't be around this controversy. And she said, give me a break. Honey, you drank. You were around a lot of controversy in your life. Don't hand me this shit. It was like, when you're in a bar, let me tell you something. There's some controversy. They're also called fights when you're in bars. Or in Alcoholics Anonymous, they're called business meetings. You know? And eventually somebody whips out the trail of traditions and says, now, wait a minute. There's only one ultimate authority, and that's tradition 2. Or somebody comes up with something so that we get back on the track, and then they say a prayer. I mean, they don't do that in bars. Okay? They do that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was like, that's how I learned about them. I mean, I first read about them first of all, I read about them in the back of the book because I had really never listened, so I didn't know what they were about. Then I read about them in the 12 and 12, and then we had to practice them. And I was told, like, my primary purpose was, and like, to shut up. You ever been on a 12-step call with a drug addict? You go to a drunk's house, and you're the only one that knows anything about alcoholism? I went there once, and it was not that long ago. I went with this lady, and she was, I would say that she had a problem with dual identification, okay? And this other drug addict came to help out, certainly willing to spend her time. She walked in the door, and she proceeded to tell us all how this woman was going to get sober. The woman didn't even want to get sober. She just only wanted to get through the night, And I had said right up front, gee, I can't spend the night with her. I want you to know, all the people left before me, I was the only one who was still with that drunk at the end. And I was thinking, what does she need? Does she need that old orange juice and Caro syrup? See, they trained me. I was the only one that called central office at the end and told them what happened. See, I was trained. People, those old-timers, okay, told me, this is what you do, okay? Like, write notes. And I used to have to write notes to remember what to do. I wrote notes for this particular presentation. Okay, what else do they do in those little home groups? I mean, when I was new, we had a mascot in our group. His name was Phil, and he had a little problem getting sober. And he lived in a dumpster, and everybody knew he lived in a dumpster. I mean, you could smell him. It wasn't, like, hard to figure out. And one night it got really cold, and it happened to be Halloween, and I was all dressed up as this dance hall girl to go to a AA dance. Oh, yay. And my friend called me and said, Liz, go get Phil. He's in the dumpster. It's going to be real cold tonight. I'll let him sleep in the rec building of my apartment complex. Pick him up. And it was like, wait a minute, I'm going to a dance. This is an AA function. And she said, excuse me? Hey, excuse me? What do you mean an AA function? That's a social event. You're going to do an AA function. You're going to pick up Phil. So I had to go out and pick up Phil. And I didn't know how to get Phil out of the dumpster, I mean, what do? Knock on a dumpster and say, Phil, please come out? And I knew he was going to stink up the car, and I had this, like, phony little outfit on that I was never going to wear again. And I'm trying to pick him up, and he wasn't there. He happened to be in the park that night, but the neighbors knew. The neighbors who lived in the apartment above the dumpster said, he's not here. I think he's over in the park. In other words, this man was well known. And then I had to go chase him around the park. By this time, I'm in a rage because I still want to go to that dance. Okay, so I'm chasing him around the park. Get in the car! Get in the car! And I was furious. I didn't care to do these kinds of things. But those old-timers at those meetings had taken him in, and they said, and now you're going to do the work. I did not do any of these things willingly. I did not realize they were training me. That's how out of to lunch I was most of the time. They were showing me how to care about another alcoholic. Because of those guidelines, and I think Angel Carrot described it quite well, they do stand on that line. When you see, like, 20 with their arms crossed, like, you're not going to mess with him. You're going to say, maybe I should try it. I'll give it a little thought. So what other things? In my home group now, there was a man that just went into the hospital, okay, and he was in there 2 months. Okay? What was he going to do? He can't get out. He had a bad back. He was laid up. They took a meeting to him. Remember they did things like that? They took meetings to people who couldn't get out of the house. I had a friend that was part of that home group, that initial home group, and she had cancer, and she was no longer going to get out of her house, and we knew that, and we went to her house for a while. We just took that meeting in there. And it was like on the off night where there wasn't such an in-group meeting or something like that. We slowly but surely. But the growth that you get from following it, that's what our traditions talk about, that, that we honor the person who still suffers, when we go out and we extend ourselves a new way. First I have to do it personally, and then I have to do it as a group. And so some of the people, matter of fact, a person right here helped organize that meeting, goes to the hospital room and helps them. And one of the other problems we had was a newcomer that, frankly, was really down and out and didn't have a place to stay. And they made sure that this man had a roof over his head. I don't know that he was the most welcome guest amongst our fellowship, but they made sure that he had enough to eat that day, and we all, surreptitiously made sure that there was enough funds so that he wouldn't go hungry. And they did that a lot when I was new. I remember us doing that for Phil. It was like, well, Phil hasn't been eating the last 3 days, and somebody would make sure that he got something to eat that day. Some of the other possible ways that we can help it is realization that those that are promoting these destructive things are just doing it because they don't know any better. They've never had the education I had. I was lucky. I could have gone to some of the other meetings, and occasionally I would think, well, I'm recovered now, and I would go to some more trendy meetings, and little home group members would call me and say, Liz, you haven't been there for 2 weeks. Are you canvassing the vicinity to see if you get better opinions? And I was, it was like, I said I was just, checking it out, so I could really appreciate the group, and so they said, well, if you really appreciated the group, you'd help carry the message here. It was like, you turn around and you take that action, and then you follow through. I didn't know about those things. I was a drunk, and I knew about doing things that were destructive. I did not know about consistency. And they taught me that. And that's kind of what the traditions tell you about. There has to be consistency in carrying the message, and you have to be consistently on guard, about your own recovery and caring for another person. Okay? Appreciation is the key to correcting our problems, and that lies in education. They educated me, They didn't tell me these are the rules. They would say, gee, if you don't want to do it, you just might drink. And I did have that experience once. I went back out and I drank, and then I called that lady who had spent that time with me and explained the disease to me, and I said, I'm doing what you said I'd do, and I swore I was never going to do it. She said, I'll pick you up. Are you willing to recover this time? And sure enough, she took me to that meeting, and then my job was to pick up all the others. What happened was I wasn't so wonderful, but they did send me out on the calls, and they'd say, you go pick up so-and-so. I remember one of my first 12-step calls, I said, why are you taking me? And she said, well, I can watch both of you shake. Because I was only like about 3 days sober, so I was shaking, then this other newcomer was really shaking, and she said, oh, I'll be extremely grateful. And she said, this person needs to know that you're sober 3 days, and that's all you're going to say. You haven't had a drink for 3 days, you don't know anything else. So that's what you limit yourself to. So that's what I did. When you study the traditions, okay, when you make that effort to study traditions, it starts opening up. I didn't know what most of those words meant. I didn't even think about it. I thought, well, okay, what does it mean that, we'll never endorse other things? I was ready to endorse everything. I was like the newcomer. If you read about them, that's what they initially AA was like. Let's endorse these hospitals. Let's get on. I saw no reason for anything wrong with treatment centers. I thought they were wonderful, and we'd get these wonderful people in, and they would really know everything, except they started to come in, and they came in mass a lot of times. There was a little meeting in Van Nuys I used to go to, and they did. They came in mass. A treatment center came in mass, and it was a nice little small meeting, and they kind of took it over. And what happened was those old-timers started to fade away, and they'd say, well, we have our own meeting over here that we can go to. But where we undermined it is we didn't realize is that there was nobody left to help get these new people educated. There was no one there anymore. So what else can a home group give to you? You become accountable. I mean, if you know you're going to be seen week after week, you clean up your act because you don't really want them to know how bad you are. And so you think of these things, but you don't take action on them. You watch to see what other people do. And that's what I used to do. I used to take notes about the old-timers. I'd think, well, that's what they're saying. And when I was shooting my mouth off and they would say, be quiet, Liz, I learned to be quiet much faster, I'd only say 2 or 3 words. I'd know that look, and I'd sit down, and because I knew what was coming. And afterwards, they came over to the end of the meeting. They'd talk to me. You don't notice that. Today, most people just keep finishing their pitches, and they clap no matter what happens. And so the quiet guidance of these members is what's missing, The home group makes it a little easier, because what happened in the home group is the old-timers now talk among themselves. Are we carrying that message? Are we making sure that this new person becomes welcomed? I mean, I didn't realize that they did this. It shows you how out of lunch I was. They sat down and they said, did you see the new person over there? And did Liz, who's the new person, go over and say hello to him? So they were watching not only the new people coming in, they were watching the people that were middle and saying, is she bothering to carry the message? And I'd say, I don't have anything to say. And they say, well, you're right. All you have to say is your name. And she will at least remember some person. And they said, you can clean off the chair next to you to make sure she has a seat. And they said, you can drive her home at the end of the meeting. And those are the things that they taught me to do. So they watched, and they talked among themselves, little known to me, about not only how was the newcomer being taken care of, but how was I helping to carry the message. And if I was falling a little short, they'd just remind me, very nicely, don't you think you ought to do that? Like it was going out to pick up Phil in the dumpster. I mean, they knew I was going to the dance because I'd been talking about it, because I thought I was really slick, and I thought that outfit was cute, and I was going to really recover and have a good time because we were going to be happy, joyous, and free. And they told me happy, joyous, and free meant that I was going to help another alcoholic, that my life would turn around. It describes these spiritual principles. And if I practice the spiritual principles, my life will change, and then I will want to do these things. When it tells me that I have that vital spiritual experience, that those old ideas and emotions that used to run me will be cast to one side and they will be replaced by something different. And that's what happened. But they had to be sure that it was going to happen, and so they guided me through that. My little home group has a tradition workshop, or a couple of workshops coming up. And that was one of the things we decided to do for AA as a whole. Put on these workshops so that other members, wherever they come from, can come in and learn something about Alcoholics Anonymous, whether it's a home group workshop, which we had, where we talked about the importance and how we grew. What happened was a bunch of old-timers just got together, just a couple, and they said, let's start this new group, which is certainly something people here can do. And they took out some pamphlets, and they invited a whole bunch of people. I got this flyer, and it said, come to our first meeting. I went to the first meeting, and heaven knows something else came involved, but I went back I went back because what they had there was that they talked to one another in a friendly manner. They all wanted to recover, and that's that warmth and caring that I had when I was new and wasn't seeing anymore. What happened to my very initial home group is it's still in existence, I'll be honest, but most of the people that are there have passed away. They were pretty old when I came in, and they just got old and died. And I don't feel comfortable going back to that group. I don't know those people anymore. Part of that is my responsibility was I didn't hold the line lots of times. I was the one that said, okay, well, let's, they're 20 against 1, let's get them do it. I wasn't the one that spoke up and said, no, this is Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is my message, to help carry the message to another alcoholic. I cannot help necessarily, or 12-step somebody that has a drug addiction problem. I don't understand where they're coming from, and because I didn't stand up and say something then, that little home group died. We were at the convention this past year, or 2 years ago, and somebody was sitting behind the table that we knew very good, typing up all the registration forms, and this man said, people don't have home groups. Nobody has home groups, or there are home groups that don't exist anymore. These meetings are dead. Where did they go? And that's why we decided to put on that workshop on the home group, because it was dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I got sober, with those people that cared. They watched me. And so that's one of the reasons why we started to educate some more, like make it available. So it takes a little funds, it takes a little energy, a little work. And then when I do that, I extend myself in a new way. I also think I'm running out of time. I guess just for the closing is, I didn't realize it was going to be Liz that was going to be responsible for being the old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous. I kept waiting for the people that were in between the people that had died and me, and there aren't any people anymore. I don't know where they went. I don't know what happened to them. There are out there, and I know I can call them up and I can talk to them, but I don't see them so much readily at the meetings. Maybe they are in those smaller meetings. Maybe it's time that alcoholics say, okay, I'm going to be the one that stands up. And you have to take a little flack because people will criticize it. But in the long run, my recovery depends on what I'm willing to do. And so sometimes I have to take those kind of criticisms. I have to be willing to stand up and say something different. Be the unpopular person. Be the one that says when everything's the same, say, no, I don't agree. That's what people did for me, and because of that, I can help turn it around for some of you, and hopefully you can recover in Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.